The basement war room beneath the Imperial Palace sat 90 feet underground, insulated by reinforced concrete walls, 4 feet thick. On the morning of August 6, 1945, the space hummed with the familiar rhythm of a losing war. Field Marshal Shinroku Hata's morning intelligence briefing had become a ritual of managed decline, each day bringing news of another city reduced to ash, another division destroyed, another 1,000 young men who would never return home. The officers gathered around the massive oak table had long since stopped believing in victory. They spoke now only of honor, of fighting spirit, of dying well. What none of them knew, as they sipped their bitter tea and reviewed the previous night's bombing reports, was that in less than 15 minutes, a single decoded transmission would shatter every illusion they had constructed about the war they were fighting. At precisely 08:15 hours, Communications Officer Lieutenant Colonel Tishi Yamamoto burst through the steel door without the customary bow. In his hands, he carried a decoded transmission that would fundamentally alter how Japan's military leadership understood the war they had been fighting. The message was fragmentary, transmitted by the Hiroshima Regional Military Command before all communications ceased. Entire city destroyed by single bomb. Blast radius exceeds all previous bombardment. Unknown weapon type. Casualties catastrophic. Request immediate. The transmission ended mid-sentence. General Yoshiro Umezu, Chief of the Imperial General Staff, read the message 3 times. His first assumption was that American B-29 bombers had conducted the largest conventional bombing raid of the war, perhaps 500 aircraft dropping incendiaries simultaneously. The mathematics seemed impossible otherwise. Hiroshima was a city of 350,000 people spread across 27 square miles, but additional reports arriving throughout the morning told a different story. Weather reconnaissance had reported only 3 B-29s over Hiroshima that morning. 3 aircraft. Not 300. 3. Admiral Suimu Toyota, Chief of the Naval General Staff, stood at the massive wall map tracking every known American military asset in the Pacific. His intelligence staff had become exceptionally skilled at predicting American operations. They knew bomber formations, typical ordnance loads, and expected damage patterns. Nothing in 3 years of air war suggested 3 aircraft could destroy an entire city. "We have mapped every American bomber group," he said, his voice carrying the exhaustion of a man who had watched his predictions prove correct again and again, each time bringing only worse news. "We know their fuel capacity, their bomb loads, their typical formation sizes. 3 aircraft cannot carry enough explosives to accomplish what these reports describe. It is physically impossible." Quote, by 1000 hours, reconnaissance flights attempting to reach Hiroshima reported something unprecedented. Pilots described a mushroom-shaped cloud rising over 40,000 feet, visible from 150 miles away. The cloud glowed with colors they had never seen, purples and oranges that seemed to pulse with internal light. One pilot, his voice shaking as his transmission was recorded, said he felt like he was witnessing the anger of gods made visible. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo received the first eyewitness account at 11:30 hours from a railway official who had been 15 miles outside Hiroshima. The man's testimony, recorded by Togo's secretary, described a flash brighter than 1,000 suns followed by a pressure wave that knocked trains off their tracks. He reported that the entire city center had simply vanished, replaced by a firestorm visible from the mountains. "I thought the sun had fallen from the sky," the man said, weeping. "Everything I knew, everyone I loved, gone in an instant of light." The afternoon meeting of the Supreme War Council convened at 1400 hours in complete silence. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki, who had survived multiple assassination attempts for even suggesting peace negotiations, read the accumulated reports. His hands trembled slightly as he placed the documents on the table. "Gentlemen," Suzuki began, his voice barely above a whisper, "we must consider what this means." General Korechika Anami, the Minister of War, and the most ardent advocate for continuing the fight, spoke first. "American propaganda. They want us to believe they possess weapons they do not have. Hiroshima was destroyed by conventional bombing, and they are using deception to undermine our will to fight." Admiral Toyota interrupted. something he would never have done in normal circumstances. 3 aircraft, Anami-san. Our radar tracked them. Our observers watched them. 3. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them like volcanic ash. For 3 years, Japanese military doctrine had been built on a single premise. American industrial might could be overcome by Japanese spiritual strength and tactical innovation. The Americans could produce more ships, more planes, more tanks, but Japanese forces would fight with such ferocity that American casualties would become politically unbearable. This calculation had guided every decision since Pearl Harbor. When American industry produced 300,000 aircraft, Japan's leaders told themselves that Japanese pilots, though outnumbered, would fight with 10 times the spirit. When American shipyards launched cargo vessels so quickly that they outpaced German U-boats sinking them, Japan consoled itself that American sailors lacked the warrior's heart. But a single bomb that could destroy a city suggested something far more troubling. It suggested that American industrial and scientific capacity had reached levels that made Japanese resistance not merely difficult, but meaningless. It suggested that America had been developing weapons in secret while simultaneously fighting a two-ocean war. It suggested that everything Japan's military leadership believed about the nature of modern warfare was obsolete. Intelligence officer Colonel Hideaki Sato presented the afternoon's analysis at 1600 hours. His team had been calculating American industrial capacity since 1941, and their numbers had been consistently, terrifyingly accurate. America had produced 88,410 tanks during the war. Japan had produced 6,450. America had built 41 aircraft carriers. Japan had built 15. American shipyards had launched cargo vessels so quickly that they outpaced German U-boats sinking them. Colonel Sato's reports had been arriving on command desks for years, each one documenting American production that seemed impossible by Japanese standards. Each report had been filed away, dismissed as exaggeration by analysts who could not accept what the numbers meant. Sato said, his voice barely above a whisper, "If the Americans can destroy entire cities with single bombs, then they possess scientific capabilities that render numerical comparisons meaningless. They are not fighting the same war we are fighting." Foreign Minister Togo added what everyone was thinking but no one wanted to say. "And if they have one such bomb, we must assume they have more." The Japanese understanding of American power had been shaped by a series of carefully constructed beliefs that began long before Pearl Harbor. These beliefs, documented in countless staff meetings and strategic assessments, would all collapse within days of Hiroshima. But to understand what the High Command finally realized, one must first understand what they had convinced themselves was true. In November 1941, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the Combined Fleet, had provided the most accurate assessment of American industrial capacity that any Japanese leader would offer during the entire war. His warning, recorded in Naval Staff minutes, was explicit. "I can run wild for 6 months or a year, but I have utterly no confidence for the second or third year." Yamamoto had lived in America. He had studied at Harvard and served as a naval attaché in Washington. He had toured American factories and witnessed the industrial infrastructure firsthand. His calculations were not based on hope or nationalist fervor, but on cold mathematics. America's steel production alone exceeded Japan's total industrial output. American petroleum reserves were effectively unlimited compared to Japan's precarious dependence on imports. But Yamamoto's warnings were systematically ignored by the very staff now sitting in the underground bunker, contemplating Hiroshima's destruction. The Army's strategic planning documents from 1941, recovered from archives after the war, revealed the alternative narrative that military leadership had embraced. American industrial might would be neutralized by 3 factors. First, distance. Japan's conquests would secure a defensive perimeter so vast that American logistics would collapse under its own weight. Every ship, every aircraft, every bullet would need to travel 5,000 miles across hostile ocean before reaching combat. Japan could sustain its forces from nearby conquered territories, while America exhausted itself in feudal supply chains. Second, morale. American society was soft, individualistic, and incapable of sustaining heavy casualties. Japanese military doctrine assumed that after losing 30,000 to 40,000 men, American public opinion would demand peace negotiations. The Japanese soldiers' willingness to die would outlast America's willingness to fight. Third, tactical superiority. Japanese forces, through superior training, warrior spirit, and tactical innovation, would inflict casualty ratios that made American numerical advantages irrelevant. One Japanese soldier would equal 3 to 4 Americans in combat effectiveness. These assumptions had been tested and found wanting at every single engagement of the Pacific War. Yet Japanese high command had consistently reinterpreted defeats as validation of their theories needing minor adjustments rather than fundamental revision. At Midway in June 1942, Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers in a single day. The official assessment blamed bad luck and tactical errors, not American cryptographic superiority or the fundamental vulnerability of Japan's carrier-focused strategy. The underlying assumption that Japanese forces could overcome numerical disadvantages remained intact. "We were defeated by fortune," the official report stated, "not by American capability." At Guadalcanal, from August 1942 to February 1943, Japanese forces discovered that Americans could sustain logistics across vast distances and could match Japanese soldiers in jungle warfare. The official assessment blamed local commanders for insufficient fighting spirit, not the impossibility of the strategic situation. The underlying assumption that American society would crack under sustained casualties remained intact. One staff officer wrote in his diary, "The Americans fight like merchants, counting their losses and gains. Soon they will decide the price is too high." By August 1945, every major assumption had been systematically demolished by reality. Yet senior leadership had never formally acknowledged this. General Anami's continued advocacy for fighting to the last citizen represented not stupidity, but the logical endpoint of beliefs that had never been properly questioned. The afternoon of August 6th marked the first time in the entire war that Japan's Supreme War Council confronted their illusions directly. Intelligence Colonel Sato presented what he called the reality assessment, a document his team had compiled over the previous 6 months but had been prevented from presenting until now. The numbers were devastating. American aircraft production in 1944 alone exceeded Japan's total production for the entire war. American shipyards were building escort carriers faster than Japan could train pilots. American ammunition factories produced more shells in a week than Japan's factories produced in a month. But Sato's most damning statistics involved scientific research. His intelligence network had documented American research facilities, employing over 130,000 scientists and engineers working on military technology. Japan's comparable effort employed approximately 6,000. American research universities, Harvard, MIT, Berkeley, Chicago, had larger physics departments than Japan's entire scientific community. "The atomic bomb," Sato explained, his voice steady but his face pale, "required facilities that we could not have built even if we had known how. The Americans constructed entire cities in secret: Oak Ridge, Tennessee; Hanford, Washington; Los Alamos, New Mexico. These facilities consumed more electricity than major Japanese cities. They employed 130,000 workers. The Manhattan Project cost $2 billion, more than Japan spent on its entire war effort in 1944. Foreign Minister Togo asked the question that would echo through subsequent war crimes, trials, and historical analysis. How could we not know? Sato's answer was uncomfortable but accurate. "We knew, Foreign Minister. Our intelligence services reported on American industrial expansion continuously. We intercepted communications about large-scale secret projects. We documented their scientific recruitment efforts. But every report was dismissed as exaggeration or propaganda. We chose not to know because knowing would require acknowledging that we could not win." Admiral Toyota added his own bitter assessment. "The Americans fought this war with one hand tied behind their back. They fought Germany and Japan simultaneously, while developing weapons we cannot comprehend. They produced more war material than we thought physically possible, while maintaining their civilian economy at levels that exceeded peacetime production. They are not merely stronger than us. They are operating on a different level of civilization." This admission, that America represented not just greater strength but a different category of capability, marked the fundamental shift in understanding. For 4 years, Japanese propaganda had portrayed Americans as materialistic and weak, dependent on machines because they lacked spiritual strength. The atomic bomb revealed this narrative as catastrophically wrong. The psychological impact extended beyond simple military calculation. Cabinet Secretary Hitsune Sakomizu recorded in his diary that evening, "We have been fighting an enemy we never understood. We assumed they thought as we thought, that their society functioned as ours functioned, that their limits matched our limits. Hiroshima proves we were fighting blind." August 7, 1945, began with confirmation that made Hiroshima seem even more incomprehensible. Reconnaissance aircraft that finally penetrated the radiation zone transmitted photographs that would circulate among high command within hours. Major Sune Kitamura, the pilot who flew the first successful reconnaissance mission, reported weather conditions he had never encountered. Updrafts so powerful they threw his aircraft 2,000 feet higher in seconds. Air temperatures that spiked his instruments. Visibility obscured by smoke that rose in a column to the stratosphere. "Flying over Hiroshima," he reported, his voice shaking, "was like flying over the entrance to hell." The photographs developed by 1100 Hours showed something that military analysts initially refused to believe. The city center, approximately 4 square miles, had been completely flattened. Not destroyed in the conventional sense where rubble and building foundations remained, but flattened to bare earth. Structures had been vaporized. The reconnaissance team estimated that everything within a mile of the blast center had ceased to exist in any recognizable form. Intelligence analysts compared these images to conventional bombing results, the most devastating conventional raid of the war. The Tokyo firebombing of March 9th through 10th, 1945, had required 334 B-29 bombers dropping 1,665 tons of incendiaries over 3 hours. Hiroshima's destruction exceeded that raid's devastation, accomplished by a single bomb from a single aircraft in a single instant. One analyst, staring at the photographs, said simply, "This changes everything. Every assumption we have made about defense, about warfare, about survival, is now meaningless." The Supreme War Council reconvened at 1400 hours on August 7th, with new intelligence that fundamentally altered the strategic landscape. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov had summoned Japanese Ambassador Naotake Sato to the Kremlin at midnight Moscow time. The message was brief. The Soviet Union would consider itself at war with Japan, effective August 9th, 1945. This announcement shattered Japan's final strategic hope. For months, Japanese diplomacy had worked desperately to negotiate Soviet mediation for peace terms. The fantasy was that Stalin, never fully trusted by his American and British allies, might broker an arrangement that preserved some Japanese territory and prevented occupation. The Soviets entering the war eliminated this possibility completely. General Anami's face, according to multiple witnesses, went pale as the implications registered. Japan now faced enemies on all fronts, with no prospect of negotiated settlement. American atomic weapons from the east, Soviet armies from the north, British Commonwealth forces from the south, and Chinese resistance continuing in occupied territories. The empire that had once stretched from the borders of India to the mid-Pacific was being compressed back toward the home islands with crushing force. Foreign Minister Togo presented the stark reality. "We have 3 choices. Surrender unconditionally, fight until every city is destroyed by atomic weapons, or fight until Soviet and American forces invade and Japan ceases to exist as a nation. There are no other options." The silence that followed was absolute. These men, who had spent their entire lives preparing for war, who had dedicated themselves to the warrior's code, were being forced to confront the reality that continued fighting meant not honorable death, but the complete erasure of Japanese civilization. August 8th brought fragmentary intelligence about Soviet movements. The Red Army had launched a massive assault into Manchuria with overwhelming force. The Kwantung Army, once the elite formation of Japanese military power, was being systematically destroyed. Soviet tank columns advanced 50 miles in the first day, encountering resistance that collapsed before forces that had learned their trade destroying Nazi Germany. The Manchurian operation demonstrated another uncomfortable truth about American power. The Soviets were equipped with thousands of American vehicles, trucks, and communications equipment provided through Lend-Lease. American industrial capacity had not only sustained its own forces across 2 oceans, but had also equipped allies on a scale that seemed impossible by Japanese standards. A single American program, Lend-Lease, had provided more material to Soviet forces than Japan's entire industrial output for the war. "We are fighting," one staff officer observed bitterly. "An enemy who can afford to give away more war material than we can produce." At 11:02 hours on August 9th, a second atomic bomb destroyed Nagasaki. The communication from the Nagasaki Regional Command was even briefer than Hiroshima's. Second atomic attack. City destroyed. Casualties catastrophic. Then silence. The Supreme War Council emergency session that afternoon descended into something unprecedented in Japanese military protocol. Open acknowledgement of complete strategic failure. Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai spoke with remarkable candor for a military officer in that environment. "The Americans have demonstrated that they can destroy our cities at will, one by one, until nothing remains. They have demonstrated the capability to continue this indefinitely. We cannot defend against weapons we cannot detect until they detonate. Our anti-aircraft systems are irrelevant. Our fighter aircraft cannot intercept what they cannot find. Our civil defense preparations are meaningless." Army Chief of Staff General Umezu added his own assessment, one that would have been considered defeatist heresy weeks earlier. "The atomic bomb changes fundamental military calculations. Concentrated forces become targets. Cities become targets. Our strategy of fighting to the last citizen assumes Americans must invade to occupy. But if they can destroy cities without invasion, our entire defensive doctrine becomes obsolete. They can simply eliminate Japan from existence without ever setting foot on our soil." Intelligence estimates presented that evening calculated that America likely possessed between 3 and 7 additional atomic bombs, with production capacity for more. Even if this estimate was high, even if America possessed only one more weapon, the strategic implication remained identical. Continued resistance was suicide. Cabinet Secretary Sakomizu recorded the Emperor's private comments from an audience that evening. His Majesty expressed that the unendurable must be endured. "The atomic bombs have demonstrated that continued resistance will result in the complete annihilation of the Japanese people. We must accept terms that preserve the nation, even if those terms are painful beyond measure." The phrase, "the unendurable must be endured," would become the foundation for Japan's surrender announcement. But the path from this private imperial acknowledgement to actual surrender would require navigating military opposition that remained fierce despite overwhelming evidence. August 10th brought the formal Japanese surrender offer transmitted through Swiss diplomatic channels. The message was conditional. Japan would accept the Potsdam Declaration terms provided the Emperor's sovereignty was maintained. The American response, delivered August 12th, was deliberately ambiguous. The Emperor would be subject to the supreme commander of Allied powers, but his ultimate status would be determined by the freely expressed will of the Japanese people. This ambiguity created the final crisis. Military hardliners led by General Anami interpreted this as unacceptable. They argued for continuing resistance despite atomic weapons. Their position was no longer based on victory prospects but on preserving national honor through destruction rather than accepting occupation and foreign judgment. "Better to die as warriors," Anami argued, "than to live as slaves under occupation. Better to see Japan destroyed completely than to see the Emperor subjected to foreign authority." The debate that followed, conducted in the Emperor's presence in an unprecedented midnight meeting on August 14th, revealed the complete transformation of Japanese strategic thinking. Admiral Yonai, who had once supported the war, now argued for immediate acceptance. General Anami speaks of honor, but what honor is there in leading our people to extinction? The Americans can destroy every city in Japan without ever invading. They have proven this capability. Continued resistance is not courage. It is murder of our own people. Foreign Minister Togo added, "The Americans are offering terms that allow us to survive as a nation. They are not demanding the Emperor's execution. They are not demanding that Japan cease to exist. If we refuse, the next atomic bomb will fall on Kyoto, then Osaka, then Tokyo. We will have nothing left to defend. The Emperor's decision, announced in the early hours of August 15th, accepted the Allied terms. His radio address to the Japanese people, the first time most citizens had heard their Emperor's voice, used the phrase that Cabinet Secretary Sakomizu had recorded. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. The time has come when we must bear the unbearable and endure the unendurable. The surrender formalities extended through late August and early September 1945. But the psychological transformation of Japanese high command was complete by August 16. What followed was not merely military defeat, but a comprehensive re-evaluation of everything Japanese leadership had believed about modern warfare, industrial capacity, and their own place in the global order. The formal surrender ceremony aboard USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, brought Japanese representatives face-to-face with the physical manifestation of American power they had consistently underestimated. Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, who signed the surrender document, recorded his impressions in his diary. The harbor was filled with American warships as far as one could see. Hundreds of vessels, aircraft filled the sky in formations that blocked the sun. The Americans displayed their power not through threats but through simple presence. This armada represented a fraction of their total military force, yet exceeded everything Japan possessed at the peak of our strength. General Yoshijiro Umezu, representing the Imperial General Staff, noted the ceremony's location was itself a lesson in American capability. We surrendered aboard a battleship built in American yards in less time than it took us to plan a single naval operation. The Missouri was one of dozens of capital ships they constructed, while simultaneously fighting across 2 oceans and developing atomic weapons. We prepared for war for a decade. They prepared for 15 months and buried us. The American occupation force began arriving in late August, and Japanese military observers documented details that reinforced their new understanding. The equipment, organization, and logistics demonstrated capabilities that previous intelligence reports had accurately described, but high command had refused to credit. A single American infantry division moved with more trucks than the entire Imperial Army possessed. American supply operations delivered fresh food to troops, while Japanese forces had been starving. American medical facilities treated injuries that Japanese military medicine considered untreatable. Intelligence Colonel Sato compiled his final report in September 1945, titled, "Why We Lost: An Assessment of Strategic Miscalculation." The document, now preserved in Japan's National Institute for Defense Studies, provided brutal honesty. We lost the war in December 1941 when we attacked an enemy we did not understand. Every battle thereafter was simply the working out of inevitable mathematics. American industrial capacity exceeded ours by factors of 10 to 20 in every category. Their scientific establishment was larger than our entire educated population. Their resource base was effectively unlimited, while ours depended on conquests we could not sustain. We fought believing spirit could overcome material. We were wrong. The American Occupation Administration, led by General Douglas MacArthur, provided Japanese officials with access to information about American war production that confirmed their worst realizations. The United States had produced 88,410 tanks, 257,000 artillery pieces, 2,434,000 trucks, 17 million rifles, and 41 billion rounds of ammunition. More staggering, they accomplished this while maintaining civilian living standards that exceeded Japanese peacetime prosperity. Former Prime Minister Suzuki, in conversations recorded by American occupation historians, articulated what Japanese leadership had finally grasped. We thought we were fighting a nation of merchants who valued profit over honor, comfort over sacrifice. We were catastrophically wrong. We were fighting the most productive civilization in human history, one that could simultaneously sustain mass consumer economy and total war production. They didn't choose between butter and guns. They produced both in quantities we found incomprehensible. The Manhattan Project's details, gradually revealed to Japanese scientists through occupation channels, provided the most humbling lesson. The project had employed 130,000 people and cost $2 billion, more than Japan's entire 1944 military budget. It required constructing facilities that consumed more electricity than major cities. It involved theoretical physics at levels Japanese scientists hadn't imagined possible. The atomic bomb wasn't merely a weapon but evidence of scientific and industrial capacity that placed America in a different category of civilization. One Japanese physicist, after touring the Oak Ridge facility, wrote in his journal, "We were children playing with toys, believing ourselves masters of science. The Americans were building the future while we celebrated our past." Admiral Toyoda's final assessment, written in 1946 for occupation historians, captured the complete reversal of Japanese military thinking. "We began the war believing American democracy made them weak. Their diversity made them disunited. Their wealth made them soft. We ended the war understanding that democracy enabled innovation, diversity provided talent, and wealth funded capabilities we couldn't match. Every assumption we held was not merely wrong but precisely backwards." The psychological impact on military leadership manifested in various ways. Some, like General Anami, chose death rather than living with the reality of how badly they had miscalculated. He committed ritual suicide on August 15th, leaving a note that read simply, "I alone am responsible." Others, like Admiral Yonai, became advocates for complete demilitarization, arguing that Japan's militaristic culture had led to catastrophic strategic blindness. Most simply struggled to reconcile the warriors they believed themselves to be with the reality that they had led their nation into an unwinnable war through systematic self-deception. Japanese historians, working under occupation supervision, began documenting how thoroughly intelligence reports had been ignored. Accurate assessments of American production had been dismissed as defeatism. Warnings about American scientific capabilities had been suppressed as harmful to morale. Evidence that Japan was losing the war had been reinterpreted as temporary setbacks requiring more fighting spirit. The entire command structure had created an information environment where truth became treason and optimism became policy. One historian wrote, "We built a system where telling the truth was considered more dangerous than losing the war." The result was inevitable. The final lesson Japanese high command absorbed was perhaps the bitterest. American power had not been fully deployed. The United States had fought a two-ocean war while maintaining substantial forces in reserve, developing next-generation weapons, and preparing for conflicts that might follow. The atomic bombs represented not America's maximum effort, but what they could accomplish while simultaneously doing a dozen other things. Japanese forces had fought with total commitment of every resource. American forces had fought with comfortable margins everywhere. By 1947, when American occupation officials conducted comprehensive interviews with former Japanese military leadership, the transformation was complete. General Umezu's testimony to occupation historians summarized what Japanese high command had finally understood. "We lost because we never understood our enemy. We attributed to them our weaknesses, limited resources, narrow industrial base, inflexible thinking, when they possessed the opposite. We believed our own propaganda when we should have believed our intelligence services. The atomic bomb was not the cause of our defeat. It was the final proof that we had been defeated from the moment we started fighting an enemy we never truly comprehended. We learned too late that courage cannot defeat chemistry. Spirit cannot overcome steel. And determination means nothing when facing an enemy who possesses both determination and 10 times your capacity to give it physical form." The broader implications of Japan's strategic blindness extended beyond military calculations. The entire philosophical framework that had justified the war, the belief that Japanese spiritual strength represented a unique advantage that could overcome material disadvantages, had been proven catastrophically wrong. This realization forced a fundamental re-evaluation of Japanese identity and culture. If the warrior spirit that Japanese culture had celebrated for centuries could not provide military advantage, then what did it mean to be Japanese in the modern world? The occupation period became not just a time of military defeat, but of comprehensive cultural transformation. American administrators, recognizing that Japan's militaristic ideology had led to strategic disaster, worked to reshape Japanese society. The new constitution, drafted under American supervision, renounced war as a sovereign right. The education system was reformed to remove militaristic content. The economic system was restructured to emphasize industrial production over military power. Many former military leaders struggled with this transformation. They had spent their entire lives believing that Japan's destiny was to lead Asia through military strength. The atomic bombs had proven this vision was not just wrong but impossible. Some adapted, embracing Japan's new role as an economic rather than military power. Others retreated into bitter silence, unable to reconcile their beliefs with reality. The younger generation of Japanese, those who had fought as junior officers or enlisted men, generally accepted the new direction more easily. They had witnessed firsthand the futility of fighting an enemy with overwhelming material advantage. The economic miracle that Japan achieved in the decades following the war represented, in many ways, a vindication of American assessments. When Japanese industry focused on civilian production rather than military power, it proved capable of remarkable achievement. By the 1980s, Japan had become the world's second-largest economy, demonstrating the industrial capacity that American planners had always believed existed, but that military leadership had squandered on impossible military ambitions. Former intelligence officer Colonel Sato, in a 1970 interview conducted shortly before his death, reflected on the lessons of August 1945. We learned that accurate intelligence means nothing if leaders refuse to accept what it tells them. We learned that national myths and propaganda, when believed by those who create them, become more dangerous than any external enemy. We learned that in modern warfare, industrial and scientific capacity determines outcomes far more than fighting spirit or tactical brilliance. These lessons cost Japan millions of lives and the destruction of our entire society. I hope future generations remember them. The atomic bombs that fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed between 129,000 and 226,000 people, most of them civilians. The horror of these weapons sparked debate that continues to this day about their necessity and morality. But for Japanese military leadership in August 1945, the atomic bombs represented something beyond their immediate destructive power. They represented the final, undeniable proof that everything they had believed about the war was wrong. The transformation of Japanese military thinking in those 9 days from August 6th to August 15th represents one of the most dramatic shifts in strategic assessment in military history. Leaders who had spent 4 years convincing themselves that spiritual strength could overcome material disadvantage were forced to confront evidence that made continued self-deception impossible. The weapons that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not just bombs, but mirrors that reflected back Japan's strategic failures with terrible clarity. In the underground war room where Japanese high command gathered on August 6th, amid the concrete and steel that was supposed to protect them from American bombs, they discovered that no amount of fortification could protect them from the truth. America had not been fighting at full capacity. America had been holding back. And when America chose to reveal just a fraction of its true capability, it demonstrated a level of power that made continued Japanese resistance not just futile but suicidal. The elderly officers who witnessed this transformation, who lived to see Japan become an economic power in the very mold that American planners had envisioned, often spoke of August 1945 as the month Japan was forced to grow up. The childish belief that spiritual strength alone could prevail in modern warfare was burned away in the atomic fires of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. What emerged from those ashes was a more mature understanding of power, capability, and the true requirements for national survival in the modern world. Admiral Yonai, in one of his final interviews before his death, put it simply, "We believed we were fighting a war. We were actually fighting a civilization. The atomic bomb taught us the difference."